Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, Kate. Nice to get to talk to you here.
Thanks very much. Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'm really kind of interested in to kind of know a bit about what you've been doing recently. I suppose for me, like I've always felt there's a real sense of continuity in your work and consistency. Yeah.
Nice to hear.
Yeah. And I'm thinking kind of like I would know your work way back from your undergraduate days, and I know you were in Edinburgh. You did your MFA 2014, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, just to know a little bit about that and how that maybe affected your work, and maybe just to give us a little bit of a background of where you're coming from.
Sure. We knew each other obviously in Galway during undergraduate, and then I had a studio in Engage for a year after that, and then went straight to Edinburgh. And I think the first thing I probably would note is the fact that I hadn't made work, which kind of sounds strange, like outside of Irish light. And I was very conscious in Edinburgh, the days are very short, but it's quite bright in the mornings. And we had like these beautiful, huge windows in our studio. So I think when I had to start again, basically, because the MFA is kind of, breaking you down and then seeing where it goes, I think that was the first thing I was aware of, was time and the brightness of the days, what time's best to make the work, which is something I probably hadn't really considered before. Additionally, in that course, you do have to collaborate. It's kind of a forced part of the MFA. And so as a painter, I'd never collaborated before. So that was quite interesting. I worked with an artist called Stephen Marshall, and we had very, very different approaches to practice. He came from a more illustration background, and his work was quite large and mine was quite small. So it was just trying to work with someone, but having kind of a similar maybe intention behind the work, like maybe an honesty to the approach. I think he never over-laboured his work. It would remind you kind of the working process of like Jonathan Meese, where it's kind of like several pieces together and being quite, almost seeming flippant. And I think whereas I would probably seem quite laboured in the studio, the work doesn't take physically that much time. It's more about the process involved to get there. So then graduating, and I worked there for about a year, came back to Ireland, and I found it quite an interesting process making the work after that, because I feel like you come from such heavily supported systems, and then I had moved back to Limerick where I'd never really practiced. So that was kind of an interesting part of trying to figure out what type of art I was trying to make, what type of work, what was why was I making it in the first place? And I was quite lucky that with another artist that I work with now, Roisin O'Sullivan, we did a show here in the Old Sailors Home. And I think that was 2018, that probably more informed where the work has kind of gotten to now at this point. Because when we came in, Roisin's work would be even, I think it's probably maybe smaller than mine.
Yes.
Yeah,
I remember that show. It was really lovely. I mean, that's such a fantastic space to show the work in.
Yeah, it's a beautiful space. And I think people were surprised when they saw the show, because a few people approached me and said, you're probably one of the only shows that the work is small and you can never overpower a space like this. And we didn't want to do that. So you kind of have to play around, and see, okay, well, the space is magnificent. We're going to take inspiration from that. We kind of didn't show a huge amount of work. It's quite small. And I think it actually didn't take as long to install as we thought. I think we did it in an afternoon. And we gave ourselves 3 days because we thought, well, the space is huge. It's beautiful. I mean, to me, they look like, there's parts of this that look like paintings if you just, already.
Yeah, it's a lot to fight against.
But
you could say fight against, but you can use.
Well, I think we were expecting it to be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I think I've always been interested in difficult spaces and things that maybe seem a little bit forgotten about, like a corner or something that you may have missed. I think I'm interested in, probably certain artists that I look at maybe
Yes.
are interested in a similar, probably paint that physically.
Yes.
So I think I've always been conscious of that. So
That's what I think. I mean, like, I guess, like, I think painters like Roald de Kaiser, and Kaiser, and his work, there's a definite connection. I mean, there's something I think that your work does in his work. It's this sort of notion that the paintings find a way of activating the space around them. So there's a sense that kind of that the empty space gets brought into the work, and maybe as well there's a sense that paintings kind of talk to each other in the space.
yeah.
It's very important, that sort of placement of the work.
Yeah, and I think actually you may have introduced me to his work during my undergraduate, and I invigilated a show he had it was in Edinburgh, I think it was maybe 2015, in Inverleith House. And I think I was probably there maybe like 10 times, so I was invigilating the space. And it was quite nice to just sit with his work for that long. And, you know, it was beautifully curated. And what was quite, I mean, he's an inspiration of mine anyway, so it was quite just nice I could sit there all day. That was like contentment to me. What I thought was quite interesting was people would get quite aggressive if they didn't like the work. And that was because they were kind of being overpowered by the abstraction of it, which, I mean, to me, I never see his work as that abstract, so I thought that was quite, I mean...
Yeah, so that's what leads to your own, because I mean, there's that similar feel, isn't there? I mean, we just talked before we went, we filmed this about, you know, I was saying, maybe that's a window. Well, it's just called a window. But there's that sort of sense, and that, I get that with his work as well. It's like little sort of like little details that he might have noticed, and then they kind of get lodged in his memory and brought into the painting, and I get exactly the same feeling with your work. Yeah,
nothing is painted. Even I think I have probably just gotten more confident. I think, you know, looking back in a lot of work I did make, I think I can see now that when you're coming out of college and then you're making work, you're probably doing it to get someplace. And I think I've gone past that now, where I'm just making work for myself. And I think lockdown has been really good for that, because I knew this show was coming up, but I was I'd gotten back to a point where I was enjoying making the work for the sake of it and just sitting in my makeshift studio. And I think it brings it back to De Kaiser again. You know, he talks about, you know, the view from his window and memory, and I think that is 100% what this show has turned into. It's just, you know, traveling for a year. I was in New Zealand last year and had a show there. I made work there, and then coming home and then doing a residency in Kilreelig, and you're surrounded by nature again, and then to go to lockdown to make work throughout that process. It does become fully just the enjoyment of it and not feeling self-conscious about it because you're doing it for yourself. Even though you have a show coming up, you're doing it.
So when you're always talking, I mean, I spoke to you before, you talked about the importance of the studio. I mean, you're moving from studio to studio in this case. I mean, how was that?
It was interesting. I think I've realised now I've quite almost like a sensitivity to physical space that I'm in that I'm not necessarily aware of at the time, and it's only looking back. I can look at work that were made in specific countries and studios and know that I was probably not in a good headspace, or I wasn't comfortable in an area. And I can remember studios that I loved, and I probably made, for me, my best work because I was content. And I think I've realised maybe with the show that was here 2 years ago, around that same time, I had a studio in Wickham Street Studios in Limerick, but I had sprained my ankle, so I couldn't go up the stairs. So I had to make work at home again in my room. And I think I probably make the best work when I'm not performing. And I think that's probably, I think I need the studio to feel quite comfortable, like a place that I want to be in, so it doesn't feel performative, like I am an artist. I think I make better work when I'm just feeling like the mood took upon me to make something, which...
There's certain things like doubt
yes.
kind of like these sort of things creep into work and important to the work and kind of help you.
For sure. And I think like my show last year in Hamilton in New Zealand, it was called Controlled Emotion, and I think, you know, it was probably, you know, maybe some like homesickness or feeling very not unsecured, untethered maybe to something. Am I making a life here, or am I thinking I'm going to return back to Ireland? You know, I'm working on this. So I think it was a way of kind of getting those maybe frustrations out on it, like it wasn't conscious. But I did have a studio in Auckland, and I probably made 2 pieces there. I think everything else was made when I would come home from work, and I would potter away, and I would do this. And I think probably in an odd way, I think as a woman, I probably always maybe never felt like a woman artist or anything like that. But I would quite like, you know, like influenced by like feminist, you know, thought, like teachings and things like that. But I think I was conscious of it not like seeming feminine or making work at home. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. I was listening to a lecture from Lucy Stein recently, and she was one of my lecturers in Edinburgh, and I think she brought a lot of that, you know, conversation into the forefront of my mind, which I hadn't thought about. You know, I was making work from a place when I started into painting that was, people would say, oh, it doesn't seem like a woman made it, it seems quite masculine, and I would only paint in maybe dark colours, or even though I was reading feminist teachings, I was probably in a weird way trying to step away from those things. I didn't want to be making anything twee or in the home.
Yeah, it's quite interesting at the same time when you think people like Mary Hanlon and Laura Owens, for instance, who really embraces that kind of notion of kind of things looking quite sort of feminine, you know, that's a kind of the way to subvert in some ways, kind of, that's a real kind of abstract kind of painting thing. In a way, I suppose you do that as well, in the sense that your tiny little paintings, like, they're not heroic in any way, they're kind of modest, they're sort of humble in a sense, in kind of the way that you go about using materials, and you're very interested in the idea of the materiality of the paintings, and kind of interested in that as well.
Yeah, I mean,
what happens there? You're talking about using plasticine and things. Kind of,
plasticine. I think
not this particular work, but
no, I did have a piece with some plasticine on it, and I didn't think it particularly worked. I think I had gone through a process where I was making a lot of prints, monoprints, as a way to activate the process before even starting to paint. So I'm quite interested in kind of like ritualistic things, like things that will just activate. You just go in and that's what you do. You make prints preempting, and then I kind of had gone through a phase where I would show the work underneath other work. Happy accident in the studio, and prints as well. And I think it's probably a way of working on a certain modest, being the word, scale, but then maybe making more of a visual impact by just putting work on top of it and basically making it a larger piece of work out of it. I think I know that I can be quite obsessive about certain colours or certain materials, so I am fully aware that the work I would make maybe next year might be completely different for that reason.
Yeah, I think kind of for me as well, I kind of get a sense like there's a sort of absence in the work, you know, it's like things have been left out. And even I'm thinking, we were talking again before about the idea that you're working with ceramic pots as you were making the paintings that are going to be in this exhibition.
Yeah,
you're not going to show them?
I think I might. I don't know. Again, it was probably bringing back to that idea of I didn't want to be seen to be sitting at home making pots, but I really enjoyed it and really, really enjoyed the process and didn't do it for anything but for myself, and I think they look great. I don't know if they would. I think there would be a reason to show them because the work was made specifically during a lockdown period, and I feel like there'd be a lot of artists, yourself included, that will go back to just doing things for themselves, that maybe is just for the home, things that they can enjoy. I don't hang my own work at home, but I could definitely like make a pot and leave and look at that for a while. So I think for anyone that is making work at home, it's probably will reference that, and it will definitely put a timestamp for me when the work was made.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That it kind of becomes about sort of like the process of making, and everyone's returning to the idea of craft, for instance. There's a lot of this going on with people finding kind of things to do, finding creative things to do at home during lockdown. So it's interesting that in a kind of a kind of sideways kind of way, sort of finds its way into the work.
Yeah, and in an honest way, I've kind of probably enjoyed making this work more than I've made. I don't know why, because you've got a show coming up, it's the same process, it's not any different. I mean, obviously you're at home, but yeah, I think because we're looking for going back to craft as a form of enjoyment, that naturally is going to influence the work that you're making. And I think I do have a tendency to get fixated on the canvas if I really like the type of linen I'm using. And I just don't really want to touch it. So I just think that that's perfect for me. So like that's fine. So I can get maybe a little bit sidetracked on that. So again, like I said, I used to do a lot of printmaking and monoprinting, which was a way to just fight that kind of that need to leave something. And I think probably in a strange way, the ceramics and the making those pots was probably the same thing. Just I maybe was doing it just for a totally different intention. There was no pressure on it. And I used to make small little sculptures. So I quite like clay anyway. And looking at them, funny enough, when I look at them now, I do think, oh, they need to be bigger. And I never say that about any of my work, but I feel like sometimes the medium requires more space. Yeah. Yeah, and I think once it's floor-based, you kind of feel like maybe.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see if you do include them, how they might kind of, how you're going to connect them with the paintings.
Well, I was photographing them at home, and I had a piece, similar kind of shape, but the rawness of the canvas is there, and I had a bowl under it. It was quite, I don't know how it'll fit, but I could see it very really as a ritual. It does seem quite, I don't know if it'll fit this show, but for some reason it may be activating different thoughts in my mind. As I said, like I am quite interested in the idea of the process in the studio and what you do to get to the place that you need to be for the work. And I did think when you put this bowl kind of here and then you have the painting here, they do reference each other, but not in an abstract form way, like in a completely different.
I think that's to do with touch. Is it kind of like the touch of a brush and the touch of a kind of manipulating the clay? Is it something to do with that? There's sort of painterliness obviously in your work, where you get obviously the sort of sense of the kind of the gesture in the kind of brush stroke in the painting. So maybe that's in the clay. Yeah, maybe. So,
because I do think that sometimes the work hopefully is gestural, and then sometimes you think, I've smoothed it out a bit too much, I've rounded the edges. Yeah. It's always good to stop before that happens. And I do think with clay, like, I mean, no matter how good I would try to be at any point, you're still going to, the touch is 100% there in that. So, maybe. It's definitely worth, I think, going back to. But it's an odd one where I don't know if I wanted to have purpose either, because I've enjoyed so much just doing it for myself. So hopefully.
Great. So maybe talk a little bit more about the paintings themselves. I mean, one thing that comes across from looking at some of the other paintings that you showed me earlier, and the paintings we have on the wall, there's a sense of again, of materiality, kind of in this case, what the one we're calling window. That's a working title. That the sense of it's very much about intention. One or two gestures against this kind of raw linen background, or at least maybe it's kind of size linen.
Yes,
so you really are aware of the materiality of the things you're using, of the paint, of the canvas. Is something there you could kind of...
Yeah, like I would say the difference in the two pieces is that was made during a residency, where I was trying to make some quick work to make work during a residency, and not just, remember all, before lockdown, I think I was just happy to be there, happy to be isolated in the middle of nowhere. But I was keen to just get something down, and I had no pressure though. I thought, well, this is January, February maybe. Let's get something down, and as a kind of a memory. And then this is probably one of the more newer ones that has been made probably within the last maybe month or so. Whereas the process was quickening, I felt, for myself. Like I think maybe because I was enjoying it for myself. so I stretched a couple of raw canvases, but with that one, it was a very instant process. Like I mixed this colour, I quite liked it, but I hadn't fully mixed it. I enjoy that. So I wanted to see the kind of touch, probably is probably the only way to describe it, the feeling of putting brush to canvas to something reminiscent of that, I hope, and it's like kept it in. But it was very quick, and I do laugh because I think it was like, you know, you kind of go, yeah, perfect. And I don't feel that way probably about any of my paintings, but there was something in this that I felt,
yeah.
It might have actually, now that I think of it, maybe been a test piece, because I'm using a different size that I wouldn't normally.
And you talked about the sort of units, I guess, as well. I'm thinking, as we talked again earlier about that idea of interior, exterior.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I get the feeling almost like of a confined space in this painting.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting that you tell me that's Kilrillig, you know, that's an artist residency in Kerry. That I get a sense of kind of like, whether it's a mound or it's maybe some kind of cloud formation, but it has a sort of sense of being a kind of an exterior space or a kind of landscape space. Is that?
Yeah, and it was the studios there are quite interesting because you're in the same space that you sleep in. Maybe that's what I need. Maybe I need to be making work in the one room that I sleep in. But in the studios section, it was a glass roof, but you didn't have a view. So that was quite kind of, I felt a beautiful area, but almost kind of oppressive in a strange way, because the bedroom was a mezzanine and had a window probably about that size actually, very small window. So the natural light was coming in on top of you, but you had no sense of where you were. So and I think all the work I had made on that time probably had a darkness to them, and it was beautiful. Some days were really bright and really nice, but there was kind of a feeling of needing to be indoors. And I think now that maybe that this is more of there's a feeling of longing of looking outside, wanting to be outside, like a freshness, like a quickness. Whereas these are made in much more. So
that means, well, I've forgotten now, but you were telling me the title of your exhibition of the show that this work will be in.
Yeah, it's called Poetic Hesitations.
Poetic Hesitations. Yeah. So this is, in a way, kind of finding a way to encompass.
Yeah.
All the
But I probably come up with titles before the show. I like to work off like snappy titles, and I think with the title in general, and my last show was called Controlled Emotions, and I think, you know, I want it to be very open-minded, like very, you know that it's coming from a place of sensitivity, hopefully, to the work, but also a nod to clearly the issues I have within the studio. And I think probably that this work next to you is probably references the title of the show maybe better than any of the other work in it, because you kind of hesitate when you're doing something, and then you kind of leave it and you think, okay, this looks right, this looks correct. And there is something poetic about that kind of moment where you think, okay, I've stopped myself, I haven't gone too far forwards. And I think the titles of the show has always been reference to what is happening in the studio and what I'm doing in the studio and how I'm feeling comfortable or uncomfortable. And I think, with the show in New Zealand, that was like a lot of things that I was dealing with about moving and trying to make work and feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, or how that comes out.
Yeah, it's very interesting as we're working. It's, I guess you'd call it painting non-representational or abstract, whatever way you want to use. You know, that those sorts of things come in, but they come in a different way, and I think that sort of sense of kind of hesitation or kind of vulnerability comes into the work, or fragility, because the work is simply about that sort of, you in that process of making. And so it's really nice to see just that, there's real confidence, I think, in the pink one, that you just allow it to be those two strokes, and I think that has an effect on the viewer.
I think what's funny that you say that, because I remember somebody saying to me a really, really long time ago, like, oh, your work is really confident. Like, and similar, maybe you just
Yeah.
put one colour down or something. And I think I would have seen it as completely the opposite, as much to say like, I can't improve on that. And I know that sounds very like painterly, doesn't it? Say, oh, I can't improve on it. But that's how I feel, like quite obsessive. So I look at like a nice piece of linen on some board and I'm like content.
Yeah.
I just think that's as good as it gets for me. There's like a feeling of like a gut reaction to it being just quite a perfect thing. So I don't try and do too much because it does leave me with a sense of kind of comfort. With this work in particular, and work like that, once you don't interfere too much, I would see all the interference. That's all I see. I just see, oh my god, that was overly.
When it comes to the viewer, it comes across to the viewer sometimes, that sense of confusion maybe, or sense of kind of hesitation in a bad way.
Yeah,
So
exactly, that's true.
That has to be kind of good hesitation.
Yeah.
It has to come across that it feels like it's integral to the whole painting, that it couldn't be any other way in some ways. That feeling you get from really nice kind of abstract paintings.
And I do remember seeing like a Peter Doig retrospective years ago, and there was a video accompanying it, and he was painting on the wall like the day it showed, and I was just thinking, that is my worst nightmare. If I have to paint it on the wall, that's coming to, I couldn't control myself.
Yeah.
That would be it now for me. I think that although this is the most organised I've ever been for a show also. Yeah, the work is boxed and ready to go.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I know there's a sense of confidence in the work. Maybe that's something that kind of comes across, takes time.
Yeah.
You feel you can leave things.
Yeah, and I think when you're doing it for yourself, I think automatically it becomes more confidence seeming, because you're not doing it for, as I say, a performative reason.
Yes.
Though, I mean, there was a show attached, but I thought, I have the time.
Yeah, great. Look forward to seeing it.
Thanks, Mike. I enjoyed that.
Okay.
How are we?